Pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. When it comes to different films of all sorts, whether they be old or new, whether they be horror, action, comedy, or romance, whether they be long or short in terms of their duration, and of course, in terms of how many well-known actors or not so well-known actors there are by that terms of the ratio, there are certainly tons of picks out there that I pretty much have yet to put together. But now comes the time where I talk a bit about the explosive yield that comes by whenever a volcano is shown on screen. To that, I basically talk a little bit about Dante's Peak, released in 1997, and it stars the one and only James Bond's own Pierce Brosnan, plus Sarah Connor's own Linda Hamilton from The Terminator. So, a duo like them was probably bound to happen. But then again, when you basically take a look at many other sorts of duos out there, when you take a look at the buddy cop cliche that goes as far back as films like RoboCop and Lethal Weapon, to many others that have eventually taken place. The National Lampoon series, with groups of characters known for their funny comedic humor and well received for their amazing talents. In this instance, though, we basically get to see how a movie involves two well-known actors over the past few decades and how they basically go together in a film like this. A film dedicated to the explosive, powerful effects that happen during a volcanic eruption. In this instance, we basically get to see a lot of things take place. Dante's Peak basically starts off the way you think it is. A small town inhabited by a lot of people sits near an enormous volcano. So it gives us that sort of feeling about what Mount Vesuvius near Pompeii, which sits alongside the Bay of Naples in Italy, was probably like. This is essentially much like that. But on the set of Dante's Peak, you can pretty much tell that from a more modernized perspective in comparison to the year 79 AD, nearly 2,000 years of human civilization and evolution and technological progress have all come together. But not everything is expected to take place just the way you'd think. In comparison to Mount Vesuvius, in that particular case, that involved a lot of people paying with their lives because they had not known about such a disaster like that. But thankfully, with the many, many centuries that had passed on, we are now able to figure out how and when a volcano could erupt next to civilized areas. The famous Mount St. Helens, of course, was one of the very few cases in America, and yet one of the most deadliest in the States to take place. Except that was back in 1980, many years before this film would be out. But anyways, you got yourself Pierce Brosnan and Linda Hamilton in a civilized area near a volcano, and, well, the first few signs end up starting to come up right away. A group of skinny dippers end up going inside of a small pond that they think is fine and nice and warm, but it turns out to be a hot springs. And of course you know that boiling waters in hot springs are one of the first signs that volcanic eruptions could come by at any point. It is as terrifying as you think. Those two skinny dippers get boiled alive, like lobsters, pretty much. But then of course, more signs start picking up. Things like earthquakes, and even a few glacial parts end up melting, which of course are responsible for creating lahars. In case you had not noticed my episode on that, go check out Survival of No Limits, if you don't mind. But anyways, the volcano finally erupts with an extreme magnitude, and the eruption has an extreme power yield that probably might be as comparable as Vesuvius. But because this is a mythological one, part of the fiction in here is trying to figure out exactly what kind of volcano it is and what power level on the VEI scale is it like. But then of course the rest of the film is much about trying to survive after the eruption takes place. Lava falls all over the place, fires break out, ashes come from the sky after it's covered up by extreme amounts of superheated gas and rock. The eruption is basically just the way you'd think it would be if it were something like Mount St. Helens, Mount Pinatubo, or Mount Fuji, as these volcanoes are known to be extremely powerful in so many ways. If there's one super memorable scene though, it's the fact that Pierce Brosnan ends up getting trapped inside of a truck that they use to try to escape from the city. After the eruption gets to a point where a tunnel ends up collapsing, Brosnan ends up getting stuck. But thankfully, Brosnan survives. And so from that point on, it would be about trying to find a way out. They all involve the family trying to take a boat, pretty much, to try and escape. But these kind of rivers are in fact not like the rivers that we would find before the eruption, as they were in fact proving to be lethal. It's basically a battle of a lifetime. Dante's Peak does sort of have that sort of survival element that you'd be able to find in a lot of films out there. Jurassic Park, for example, where you got the kids inside of a kitchen trying to get away from the velociraptors, and then of course you have a lot of other things that take place. But of course, in the end, we know that in Dante's Peak, it's the same old sort of Hollywood ending that we would typically get with a lot of others from the mid to late 90s. So in this very instance, this film itself still does hold up pretty well. As one of the few big successes in terms of volcano-based movies out there, this one really does happen to be a bit of an entertainment value amongst many. And then of course, for the fact that it has such a nice cast in it, has some pretty good, well, effects, and it also has a lot more put into it, Dante's Peak does truly deserve a rather good score by any means. The score I'm going to give it is, simply put, 7.9 out of 10. Because let's just say that there are lots of other films that I might be talking about later. And many of them are not necessarily going to be as full or as impromptu as you might think about it. But when you get down to it, that's just sort of what the beauty of it is. There's always the mystery that you can find something better. But amongst many things that I have already talked about, there's still quite a lot out there to have, at least, as part of the series. So if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.